Thanks so much, Liz, for leading us in that space. And thanks so much, Sam, for giving us a little This Time Tomorrow interview. Y'all, This Time Tomorrow is one of my favorite things that we do here at Midtown because I think it's such a powerful reminder that our lives are so much bigger than being here on Sunday. And I love that we get to be here on Sunday, and I think it's important to gather and to worship together, but you all have very important things that happen in your life Monday through Saturday that God has entrusted you with, no matter how old or young you are. And it's a joy to celebrate our kiddos, and I think we have a lot to learn from our kids. And Liz was really the one who advocated for, what if we started bringing some of our Kidtown kids up to do interviews? So I'm really grateful for that, and really blessed by you kiddos being willing to come up and share with us. So thank you. To start today, speaking of kiddos, just slightly older, I want to do a little visualization exercise for you. So I want you to picture with me a college student at Boise State in the year of 2016 who has kept the Justin Bieber haircut for probably about 5 years too long. Oh no is right. I want you to picture this student that has absolutely no idea about clothing or how to compose an outfit to save his life. So all they do is wear Boise State athletic gear and baggy shorts. Also, they have absolutely no idea how to use Instagram, so they put very obvious filters on every single photo because they think that it looks cool. I'm going to have Thane put up a picture of this student in question, and you can tell me whether it matches what you were thinking or not in your mind. Oh no is right. ×2 for Jordan. He looks all right, he was just trying his best, but I fear that he fits the profile. The truth, though, about this lovely student, beyond the sporty Boise State exterior and horrible lack of hair routine, is that I had just gone through one of the most difficult and confusing and hard things I had ever experienced. And these things are never easy for me to share, but I think it's really important to share from a place of vulnerability anytime you're leading anything. And I have agonized over whether it's even valuable to share an experience like this, but I think that it's important and also healing for me to do it at the same time. I had a girlfriend at the time named Sam, and we had been together for about a year, and we had a really fun dynamic together, and like any 20-year-old and my naive little brain, I was like, well, we're gonna get married. We've been together, we've been doing the dating thing, everything is going great. There's no reason for me to think that this won't be moving forward. Sam had 1 semester of college left, and she decided that she wanted to go do a study abroad program in Costa Rica for her last semester before it was too late. And while distance relationships are never a fun time for those of you who have lived them, I'm like, it's only a few months and we're gonna make it through the semester. We'll just stay in touch every day. And she'll come back to Boise and everything will return and proceed as normal. But one day, I remember getting a text message in the morning that said something to the effect of, something bad happened last night. I'm obviously concerned, so I call her to see if she's okay, and that's when I get a bomb dropped on me that I could have never expected. Sam told me that there was a guy in Costa Rica that she had been getting to know, and while they were out the previous evening, something had happened with him. She admitted to cheating in our relationship. This promptly ended our relationship, but it left me in this state of confusion and hurt and sadness, and looking for answers to the question of how could someone that supposedly really cared about you do something like this? And how do I rebuild my sense of self after something like that has been torn down? The good news, friends, is that the Bible has much to say about the topics of desire and identity and what we're supposed to do with our desire. So that is what we're going to explore today. We are in the 7th week of our series at Midtown called The 10 Commandments. This is my last time preaching in the series, so the last time I get to make the joke about our fun creative department that came up with the name The 10 Commandments for our 10 Commandments series. I promise we've got a fun one on the way with a fun and quirky title. So we've been exploring each of the 10 Commandments and talking about what they mean for our lives. And I have really enjoyed this series because it has given opportunities to dive a lot deeper than just what is on the surface of the commandment, that actually, that's just the beginning, and the action of some of these commandments is just the surface of where we are supposed to be. And there is a clarification of the depth of what the commandment means for our lives and how we're supposed to live into it. Last week was a great example when we got to hear from Clint about the sixth commandment of do not commit murder. And he painted the picture for us that, hey, the baseline, ground zero, is just not committing murder, but that's also not at all the heart of the commandment. That if we just tick the box and say, well, I didn't murder anyone today, then I must be doing really well, we've totally missed the point. And that commandment specifically had more to do with our anger and what we do with our anger and where our anger leads us and moves us to and how we manage it. So today is going to be something similar. A reminder that the 10 Commandments were given to the Israelites at a time where God made a covenant with them to partner with them and that he was going to preserve them, and they were meant to be set apart and distinct from the rest of the world and culture at the time. So these were really important because they distinguished that these were Yahweh's people compared to the rest of the world that was living totally differently. So today we are going to dive into this seventh commandment. We're going to read it, and then we are going to look to the New Testament like we've been doing to get a further clarification and deepening of what the commandment means for our lives. So we're going to be starting here in Exodus 20. We're going to read verses 1 and 2, and then 14, which is the commandment, and then we will move from there later to the New Testament. So if you've got your Bibles, flip with me to Exodus 20. If you don't, no worries. The words are going to be right behind me on the screen. It says this: Then God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not commit adultery. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This may seem like an obvious one where there's not really a lot of morally gray area. Like everyone in here probably is in favor of like, yeah, you shouldn't cheat on your spouse, generally agreed upon terms. But I think we take commandments like this for granted because they have existed in our moral framework for so long. These frameworks had to come from somewhere, and there would have been a time where there was no picture if you didn't know these words of what was appropriate and what wasn't. And we see these images on display throughout biblical times where people had multiple wives and cheating was a totally normal thing. And that is why God gives this specific commandment. And even today, as you have conversations with people in this age of moral relativism, there are a lot of different ideas on what's appropriate and what's not in the context of a marriage relationship. So I think that it's really important we don't just breeze over this and be like, well, we're all in agreement, right? Like ideally, yes, generally, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of different ideas on these types of things. So we want to give it the care and attention that it deserves. So why does God choose to focus on adultery specifically? For some cultural context, marriage at the time that this was written was still as it is today, and that it was an exclusive, lifelong commitment to one person. And it was meant to image God's covenant of his faithfulness with his people. However, culture was quite different back then than it is today, of course, and it's important to highlight the patriarchal nature of society back then. Women were seen really as having the sole responsibility of childbearing and keeping the house in order, and they were completely dependent on men for provision and protection. The financial well-being of a woman was entirely tied up with her husband, and women were often the subject of mistreatment because of this power imbalance. So God, in his desire to care for his people and set them apart from other nations in the world, sets up all sorts of laws to help protect women. And this time period can be difficult for us to understand because it functions so differently in that regard to our own, but it's really valuable to see that God established a framework for the protection and the dignity of women, and he cared to honor women. Though this command is not just specific to men alone, of course, it was just as possible for a woman to cheat than a man, although perhaps less likely because of the factors that I just mentioned. But this was a command not directed at one party or the other, but both parties in a marriage were expected to uphold this covenant. And even outside of the Israelites, there were a lot of different places in the Near East that had similar warnings against adultery because they recognized the danger that it held for families. God desires to protect families and the dignity of people, which is why he instituted such a command. And it's not simply just the act of fornication that's condemned, but it's the unfaithfulness and lack of fidelity towards the people involved. Biblical commentator Terence Freidheim says this quote, "Adultery is a heinous crime done against someone, but it is also a sin against God himself. It violates God's creational intention, which links a positive role for sexuality with commitment and loyalty." We see this language of adultery used throughout the Old Testament to demonstrate Israel's disloyalty towards God. In our Exodus series, we saw how God's people were giving their allegiance to multiple gods and refusing to stay faithful to the covenant commitment that they had made with Yahweh, instead worshiping multiple gods. In books like Isaiah and Ezekiel and Hosea, Israel is characterized as an adulterer, forsaking their fidelity to God. Biblical commentator John Durham said, quote, "Adultery with the husband or the wife or the betrothed of another was, like idol worship, a turning away from commitment to Yahweh." So there's our very brief Old Testament survey. In the New Testament, Jesus expands on this commandment and clarifies more of what adultery is. This is a passage that some of you are probably familiar with, similar to the commandment about not murdering. He says that adultery is far more than just the physical action. He says in Matthew 5 that if you even look at someone with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. And then there's the really nice bit afterwards that comes about gouging your eyes out or cutting your hands off if they're causing you to sin. I'm looking around the room here and I'm noticing everyone's still got their eyes in their hands. So clearly none of us are struggling with this. I could probably just wrap the sermon up right now. But very specific imagery that God uses to say, hey, this is a real problem. He was not telling people to literally go gouge all of their eyes out every time that they struggle, but this is how serious he takes it. Jewish literature was all filled with these warnings that in sexual matters, thought is always the precursor to the deed itself. And instead of looking deeper at Jesus' words here in Matthew 5, because we've taught on this passage several times in the past couple of years, I wanted to look somewhere different in the New Testament, to the book of James, and explore this heart of adultery and desire. I think that this has some profound things to say about how we handle temptation. So hear these words from the book of James, chapter 1, verses 13 through 15. It says this: "No one, when tempted, should say, 'I am being tempted by God,' for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then, when desire has conceived, it engenders sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death." James starts us off here by telling us that we cannot claim that God is tempting us, for it is contradictory to the character of God. God actually physically can't do things that are incompatible with his character, and leading someone into evil, therefore, is not something that God can do. God wants people to be like him, and that's why he invites us to taste and see his goodness and participate in his kingdom. He desires to help us experience this fullness of life and give us the tools necessary to resist temptation and evil, not lead us to those very things. So it's important that we understand temptations don't come from God. Another concept that you would think would be generally agreed upon by all Christians, but I can recall some very specific conversations I've had with others throughout the years that says otherwise. I remember a particularly not so fun conversation I had with a ministry leader a few years ago in a meeting where he very boldly and proudly asserted that he was tempted by women all the time directly from God so that he could prove himself worthy. It's the very classic, it's turned into a meme, and I love it, that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. It's become so popular in our culture that people genuinely think that that's in the Bible. It's not, just for the record. But this person genuinely thought that God was tempting him so that he could prove something and prove his identity. Unfortunately, you won't find this sentiment anywhere, and we have to be really careful about the things that we express in our culture. So if God is not the source of our temptation, who is or what is. We see in both the stories of Job in the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament, in his temptation in the wilderness, it says that Satan is involved. Well, that's like really convenient for us then, because anytime that we're tempted and we fall into it, we can just say, well, like Satan made me do it. You've got the lovely shirts going around these days that say, not today, Satan. It's like such a convenient out to be able to say, well, it wasn't me. I can just move on with my day. But obviously James isn't saying that either. Though the devil may play a clear role in our temptation, we cannot place the blame on him or on God. These things are all an evasion of personal responsibility that we have to carry. And that's why he says that we are enticed by our own desire. Desire, of course, is not a bad thing at all. It's mainly a neutral word that depends on the context. Jesus in the Gospel of Luke tells his disciples that he eagerly desires to share a Passover meal with them before he suffers. I would say that that's a really great desire. When you see an injustice happening in the world and you feel sick to your stomach and that rising up that happens in you and you desire to do something about it, I think that's a really good desire. And for many years in the Christian universe, sexual desire has been something that has been painted as evil, and feeling any hint of it and that desire is problematic, but that couldn't be further from the truth. God designed us to have desire, and desires are healthy, but they're meant to be expressed in the right context within the parameters that God has outlined for us. So what makes a desire evil then? When do we bridge the gap between neutral and evil? James gives us some helpful verbs here so that we can distinguish. The first verb that he uses here is lured, or lured away. And it is similar to the word that is used to refer to Joseph being sold into slavery in the story of Genesis. When he's sold by his brothers, it says that Joseph is dragged or pulled or lured up out of the pit to be sold, signifying the loss of control of his life. And similarly for us, when we lose control of our lives, when we allow desires to drag us or lure us away. Something like eating is a very neutral desire. I would argue a really good desire, as I order my double animal style with no tomato and well-done fries after I've finished writing the sermon. But it becomes an evil desire when it leads us to eat more than our fair share while others are allowed to go hungry. Paul condemns the Corinthians for just this in 1 Corinthians 11, because there were people who were overindulging while others around them did not have enough. The other verb that James uses here is enticed. For this, you can think of something like an animal trap, where people place something enticing inside the trap to try and lure the animal to it, and when they're drawn to the bait, they fall into the trap. The same thing happens to us when we are enticed by our own desires. There is a story in Proverbs that paints this enticement with an adulterous woman that is trying to attract a young man's attention. This is Proverbs 7, verses 15 through 19. It says, "So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have decked my couch with coverings, colored spreads of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love, for my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey." How about things you didn't know were in the Bible for 200, Alex? James finishes his section here in warning us against this by using a pregnancy metaphor to talk about what happens when desire is unchecked or it isn't dealt with. That desire will produce or give birth to sin, and sin will give birth to death. Sin is one of those words that I always feel really compelled anytime we use it to define it well, because it's a religious word that's been used for centuries and often in a way that is meant to bring about shame or condemnation. So I will want to do a good job of defining it every time we talk about it. You can really think of sin as an action or thought or an attitude that's contrary to God's will and character. God is perfect and he's holy, and we are not. We are very imperfect, and we have things inside of us that are broken, that warp our perspective on how we see ourselves and others and the world around us. All of us have these areas, and when we give into our evil desires, we sin. We fall short of God's holiness and perfection. The good news for us is that God has a solution for sin, which he provides through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This progression of desire leading to sin and sin leading to death is demonstrated first in the story of Adam and Eve at the very beginning of our Bibles in Genesis chapter 3. They experience this desire to taste the forbidden fruit. And they allow that desire to grow and to grow and to grow until they are lured away by it, leading them to finally give in and eat of the fruit. This causes sin to enter the world and a fracturing the perfect harmony in their relationships with God and each other, and ultimately leads to their death. God did not encourage them to sin, and nor did Satan force them to. It was their own disordered desire that led them to sin. The command that we're studying today is rooted deeply in this sentiment of controlling our desire and not allowing it to drag us away and lead us to sin and death. I've got news for y'all. Shockingly, when you're married, people who aren't your spouse don't all of a sudden become unattractive and uninteresting. And other people aren't just seductresses or temptresses that we are meant to avoid. Jesus' words don't say that you should never look at anyone or talk to them if you're married. They say that we should not look at someone with the purpose of lusting after them or using them for our own pleasure or gain. Things like respect and honor and dignity and integrity should inform all of our attitudes and behaviors towards any person. They're brothers and sisters who are welcomed into the family of God, and we ought to treat them with all of the things that they deserve. Of course, in the story of Sam and I was not married, but the way that the story played out in my life taught me much about this spiritual principle. Now that I've had a lot of years to reflect, I don't think that Sam was some monster. I don't think that she intentionally sought to cause me pain and acted in a way that was malicious to hurt me. I think quite simply, she just allowed her desires to catch up with her and she didn't know where to turn. And her words to me were that she was in a foreign country and she was struggling with loneliness, and she was wrestling with a recent identity shift as she had been a swimmer for a really long time and had just retired from a long, high-level career in swimming and didn't know who she was anymore. And instead of turning to God with those challenges, she turned to other things to fill the void. But what she was craving isn't a bad thing, because we all crave these things. We crave intimacy. We crave a sense of belonging and identity that will last through tough times. We all need that in order to thrive in life. God actually offers those things to us fully. I just think that we are really quick to look for anything outside of God for that intimacy. Scottish writer Bruce Marshall has a really beautiful quote about this idea in one of his books. It says, "I still prefer to believe that sex is a substitute for religion, and that the young man who rings the bell at the brothel is unconsciously looking for God." I think that's a really beautiful sentiment, and one we all can relate to experiencing in one way or another. That we crave intimacy, and it's lovely to get that intimacy from people, but ultimately people are going to let us down. And even your own spouse, whom you love very much, cannot be all things to you. They're going to mess up. They're going to hurt your feelings. There are going to be really hard days where you're arguing about all types of things. And if we allow those things to fracture us and create wedges in our relationship, we allow a foothold or some sort of way that desire can start to creep in and say, well, I'm not getting it from this person. Maybe I can get it from somewhere else. And we start looking in all of the wrong areas when God is saying, I can offer you these things. And these things are a free gift to you. This story of Sam and I is not some attempt to paint myself as the good guy and someone else as a villain, because I could share plenty of my own stories where my desires have not been dealt with in healthy ways, and I have run to other sources that have caused harm, both for my own life and the lives of other people involved in the story. I certainly would never raise my hand to volunteer if someone asked if I would have all of the thoughts and actions of my life be displayed on a jumbotron in a football stadium full of people. And I don't think that any of you would be quick to raise your hand and volunteer for that as well. We know that we're broken, and we know that we have unhealthy desire, and we stand deeply in need of the grace of Jesus. So what do we do with all of that? How can we steer clear of something like adultery and withstand temptation when it arises? How do we properly order our desires to be in line with God's desires? Quite simply, it starts internally. Jesus' words in Mark 7 say that it is out of the heart that evil thoughts come. Thoughts like sexual immorality and theft and murder and adultery, greed and wickedness and deceit and debauchery and envy and slander and pride and folly. All of these evil things come from within. Put simply, we need to have faith in God. He promises to give those who have faith in him a new heart. That God will make us a new creation where we won't have to be slaves to our desires. Friends, if you never trusted God with your life and asked him to give you a new heart and make you a new creation, today is a great day to choose just that, because he is willing and able, and he is offering that to you. We have this promise that God will meet us in our greatest temptations and struggles, and he will be present, and he will not leave us. We see this in the life of Jesus as he was well acquainted with what it means to be tempted. The devil tempted him with things like food and wealth and power and status, and Jesus rejected those desires because he knew what God had in store for him would be infinitely better. Jesus is the model for someone who experienced deep intimacy with the Father that kept him through even the hardest of temptations, and we are called to follow his example. Here, lastly, from the book of Romans, this is Romans chapter 12, the very beginning of the chapter. It says this: I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. This is a verse that I have had to come back to so many times in my Christian journey. And I have had to pray earnestly throughout so many different seasons of my life for God to renew my mind, because my mind is broken. My heart is deceitful. I have these things that come up inside of me that I know are broken and not good. And I need to pray. Friends, if you're not praying like crazy, this is going to be so much harder. It's hard even when you are praying. These things are knocking on your doorstep every day of your life, and every day when you wake up, there's going to be something. So if you are not praying like crazy, this is your invitation to do so. And just when I think that I have it figured out in one of these areas of my life, it's like amazing. I had this temptation or this struggle, and I prayed for God to renew my mind, and I saw him show up, and it was awesome, and I experienced some victory over this thing. Another thing starts coming right behind it. And then you have to start the process over and over and over again of asking God to renew you and burn up these things inside of you that are broken. Ask for God to make you whole again. It takes a lot of perseverance, friends. It's not going to be easy. And just when you're thinking you've got a good grasp on things, you've got things figured out, that's when you'll slip into an unhealthy desire again. We need to pray and ask for God to transform us and renew our minds. So if you are sitting here today and you are tired, I can relate to you. If you are tired of feeling like you're a slave to your desire, or you're tired of feeling like you don't have a closeness or an intimacy that you want to experience so bad, or temptation has just been beating you up lately, today is a really great day to be renewed and to be transformed. God is faithful to meet you in that. Desire may give birth to sin, and sin may give birth to death. But I'll leave you with this to end. Faith gives birth to perseverance, and perseverance gives birth to a crown of life and a perfection that we can look forward to, where one day we will dwell with God forever, free from the evil desires and temptations of the world. So don't give up, friends. Taste and see the goodness of God and let him meet you in your struggles. Would you pray with me?